Afternoon, everyone. I'm Cary Claiborne for Adial Pharmaceuticals. Before I get started, I'll remind you that we are a public company and we'll have some forward-looking statements, so I encourage you to review our risk factors. Adial, our vision is to be the leader in the treating of addiction. Our lead focus is on alcohol use disorder, also known as AUD. AUD is a huge unmet public need. It affects estimated 30 million people in the United States alone. It's the leading cause of death for people aged 15 to 49. It contributes to over 200 different diseases, and it costs the U.S. economy approximately $250 billion a year. Despite those enormous costs, it's significantly untreated. There's estimated about, of that 30 million potential patients, 2.7 million are seeking treatment. And the vast majority of those are not seeking medical treatment. In Europe, it's an even bigger problem, where it's estimated that 55 million people are suffering from alcohol use disorder. Now, the reason so few people are seeking treatment is because there are a number of barriers associated with the medical treatments that are out there on the market today. They all have significant barriers. There's an abstinence barrier where it's required that patients be abstinent before they can even start a medical treatment. There's an efficacy barrier, because if you think about being abstinent, it works for a few people, but over 90% of patients that try abstinence don't achieve long-term abstinence. There's a side effect barrier that once someone does go through abstinence and they've gone through alcohol withdrawal and they're able to stop drinking and they get on a medical treatment, there's significant mental and physical side effects that let them not tolerate the drug they're on, therefore they stop treatment. And they're not very easy to use. I mentioned abstinence. If you think about someone trying to maintain abstinence and stop drinking, it requires a radical change in their lifestyle. They have to sometimes distance themselves from those triggers, certain family members or friends that encourage them to drink. They have to stay away from social events to have alcohol being served. And it's a drastic change in their lifestyle. If you think about it, how many people want to live like that? So therefore, they don't try it, or if they do try it, they give up on it. The medical treatments that are available, such as Vivitrol, require a painful injection in the backside once a month. Not very desirable. So because of that, most people do not seek any treatment. Our research has shown that what patients don't want is, again, they don't want side effects, they don't want painful injections, they don't want to sit around in a self-help group sitting in a circle talking about their problems. What they do want is to reduce their drinking down to moderate levels, because that's the data has shown that's where the real damage is done. It's done from that heavy drinking. That's where people do stupid things when they're drunk. They get into car accidents, they hurt people, a lot of physical abuse can happen. It's really from that binge drinking, that heavy drinking situation. We believe that our drug candidate, ADO4, is designed to meet that unmet need in the market today. It's a novel mechanism of action. It is a serotonin 3 blocker. Serotonin 3 impacts the dopamine reward system, which is believed to reduce cravings and impulsivity. And that's what really drives addictive behavior, cravings and impulse. It's designed to reduce heavy drinking. So one major difference for our drug candidate is you do not have to be abstinent to start it. The goal is to reduce that heavy drinking and not require full abstinence. And we think that's going to make it a lot more desirable for patients. It's got a good safety profile because it's a repurposed drug that's been on the market since 1991. This will be at a much lower dose. So therefore, we've got 30 years of safety data to support this drug. It's oral dose twice a day, so no painful injection or anything like that. And then one thing we really think sets us apart is our drug is really a precision treatment. It's based on a genetic test. That's the first thing that you do. If you have certain genotypes, our data has shown that our drug can be very effective for patients that have those genotypes. If you don't have those genotypes, you will not be a candidate for this drug. We think that really makes a difference in the way medicine is headed these days. So a little bit more on the drug. As I mentioned, ADO4 is an ultra-low dose of ondansetron, which has been on the market at much higher doses since 1991 under the brand name of Zofran. to treat nausea and vomiting associated with chemotherapy. You may ask, well, if Zofran is on the market, why don't you just use Zofran to treat AUD? And that's a great question. And the answer is, it's been studied for years at that higher dose. And like most drugs that work in the CNS part of the brain, the dosing is what really matters. And the data's shown that at those higher doses, it does not work. It does not help reduce cravings and impulse to drink. It's also not labeled for long-term chronic use at those higher doses because there are certain cardiovascular effects that can happen with treating it long-term at those higher doses. So between that and our patents, we believe there's very limited threat of any off-label use of ondansetron at those higher doses. We've done a phase 2b study and a phase 3 study with ADO4. The phase 3 study was recently completed and reported out in 2022. The overall population in the study did not meet the primary endpoint, but we did subgroup analysis and post hoc analysis on the study, and for certain genotypes, the data performed extremely well. As I mentioned before, it's based on a genetic test. We think this really sets us apart from the other treatments on the market. It is a simple PCR blood test, and what would happen is in the doctor's office, the doctor will offer this patient a test. You know, a lot of times what we've been told in our research is that doctors will see that a patient has increased their drinking and want to have a discussion with them in their physical, and they get a lot of pushback. The patient will say, that's not me, I don't have a problem, why are we talking about this? And if it even starts, that's where it stops. What we see now, based on our research, is that the doctor will say the same thing, but then they'll also say, you know, there's a test we can give you. It's a simple blood test, and it'll show that if you have a certain genotype, we may have a drug that can help you lower your drinking. And then the patient reacts differently. They say, wow, that's interesting. I would like to know that. And it takes it away from a behavioral issue for the patient versus maybe it's a medical issue, or maybe it's even something in their family history that gives them a reason to maybe understand why they're drinking so much. And doctors say they think that's going to open the door to a lot more people seeking treatment. We hope they're right. I mentioned some of the other drugs on the market and what some of their shortcomings are. This slide just takes a snapshot. If you go down the list and look at what we think are some of the key characteristics for a drug to be successful are, such as novel mechanism of action, oral dosing, designed to reduce heavy drinking, no need to be abstinent before you start the treatment, and genetic targeting. You see the ADO4 is really the only drug that checks all those boxes. Just to touch on a few of the others, Antabuse, the one on the far right, that's a drug where first you have to be abstinent, which means you have to go through withdrawal. Then if you get on the drug, it's designed to be a deterrent. So if you take a sip of alcohol, any alcohol gets in your system, you get violently ill. You throw up, you get very nauseous, you get all kinds of body aches. Sometimes patients get such a bad reaction they have to be taken to the ER. So think about that. Who's going to want to be on a drug like that? Vivitrol, I mentioned before, is a painful injection that you take once a month. You still have to be abstinent before you can get on it. So we feel like our drug, fits nicely in what patients need. Just a little bit more on the phase 3 study I mentioned. It was a study that was done in Europe, 300 patients. Patients were based on a genetic profile. Again, the first step was you gave them this genetic test. If they had one of 4 genotypes, they were included in the study. If they didn't, they were not included in the study. Patients were also pre-stratified based on how much they drank. If they were very heavy drinkers, and that means they drank more than 10 drinks whenever they drank, they went into a very heavy drinker category. If they were a heavy drinker, on the average, those were 6 to 10 drinks, so still drinking a lot. They went into what's called the heavy drinker category. We then ran the study for 6 months in Europe, and as I mentioned before, the overall population missed the primary endpoint. But we saw some really encouraging results when we looked at the data within that study, and we looked at it by drinking level and by those 4 different genotypes. This next slide takes a look at those 4 genotypes for the U.S. endpoint. And the U.S. endpoint for FDA is measured based on how many patients have 0 heavy drinking days in months 5 and 6 in a 6-month study. So they can drink, but they can't have one day where they drink for a man, more than 5 drinks, and for a woman, more than 4 drinks in a single day. And when we looked at the data, and we looked by genotype here, and you see the 4 that were in the study, AG, LLTT, AC, and GG, you'll see that this AG group met statistical significance, 0.021. You see the others did not, and that's what drove the whole study to not meet the primary endpoint. We also saw another group, GG, which did not hit significance, but based on what we saw, the way it was trending at the time, and the fact that there was a small number of patients, just 24 in this category, makes us believe that if we extended the study a little bit longer and enrolled more patients, a GG might also be able to hit statistical significance. So what we've done is we took all this data, we met with FDA, reviewed everything, and they felt it was very supportive. Main thing is they agreed with the endpoint and basically want us to do it again, because you can't approve something based on an analysis that was done after the fact. That's called a post hoc analysis. So we're moving forward with repeating the study, but narrowing it down significantly. So our revised clinical strategy is based on feedback from FDA, moving forward with the refined patient population. The feedback we also got from FDA was, although it's possible to get approval by doing the study one more time, then that would be a review issue. They'd wait and see what the data looked like and then decide whether it was sufficient or not. The traditional way to get a drug approved is to do 2 studies and show it in 2 separate studies. We think by doing the next 2 studies in parallel, that's the most cost-effective and lowest cost, lowest risk opportunity for us. So our current plans are that we'll have to do 2 more studies and run them in parallel. So again, based on the feedback we received from FDA, our corporate strategy going forward is to do 2 more studies with this refined patient population, focusing on the AG, possibly the GG group. Together, those represent about 20% of the patient population. So if you think about that 30 million potential patients out there, 20% of that would be 6 million estimated. A majority of those, again, are not seeking treatment and not being diagnosed. But we believe focusing on that group where we saw significance in both the phase 2 and the phase 3, that gives us the highest probability of success of being able to repeat this and do it again with a smaller patient population. At the same time, we also reviewed this information with healthcare payers. And healthcare payers like this approach. They like the genetic test as a component, because what that does is it ensures efficacy. So in other words, the first step is the patient has to have one of these genotypes, which means you're only going to reimburse for patients where the data shows that the drug should work. And payers love that. They hate paying for something where there's no benefit to the patient. Based on that, our previous pricing assumptions increased by more than 2x from what we were believing before. This is based on feedback from the patient. So we think there's a lot of upside in terms of what the revenue potential could be for this drug. The other thing we did in 2023 is we sold our preclinical business, Pernovate, which was very early stage and was over half our cash burn. So by selling that, we reduced our cash burn significantly. We got some money up front, and we have some meaningful upside if that business turns out to be successful, which we hope it will be. So overall, we're very focused. We think we have the right approach with FDA. We're working diligently to advance that and move forward with ADO4 for AUD. I'll talk a little bit on the total market opportunity. It's a huge market. This slide shows, assume just 20%, that would be AG and GG. If you got all those patients, and of course we're not saying we would, but just to show orders of magnitude, if you got 100% of those patients out, potential patients out there, that would be a $40 billion market. Obviously a huge number. But if you narrow that down and just looked at those patients I said were already seeking treatment, that would be 3.4 billion if you got all of those. And obviously, if you just got a small slice of that slice, we think ADO4 would be an amazing success for us. The next near-term catalyst for us is we have launched a pharmacokinetic study for ADO4. We initiated that study in May, and we just reported this week that we've dosed the first subjects in that study. Now, this is a study that's been required by FDA as part of an approval process based on the feedback we got last year from FDA. It's been in our plans, it's been in our cost projections that we've given, and it's relatively low cost and is expected to take less than 6 months. It's going to give us a lot of information that's going to help us design the next study and meet the requirements that FDA requires when you're bridging using a repurposed drug. So it's going to give us that information to be able to bridge the bioavailability of that drug, Zofran, or the generic version of Zofran, to ADO4. So we're going to be planning to report top-line results on that in early fourth quarter of this year. We may have some additional milestones on the interim that we'll report on as well, but it's going to be a key part of the package that we take to FDA in the fourth quarter to finalize what the phase 3 study should look like. So overall, our next steps are complete the pharmacokinetic study. That's going to optimize the elements needed for our phase 3, then finalize what those phase 3 programs should look like, review the study protocol and statistical analysis with the FDA and also the EMA, because Europe is still something we're considering, but the US is our primary focus right now. And then continue to advance discussions with potential partners. Ideally, we'd like to partner ADO4. We've had discussions with potential partners, and those discussions are ongoing under CDA. And we think that the pharmacokinetic study will also be something that they're closely watching and monitoring, and something they want to see us do as well. A little bit on our leadership team. I've got a great team of seasoned executives. Just to touch on a few, Tony Goodman worked with me at another company, Indivior, which is a leader in addiction, about a $4 billion market cap company doing $1 billion a year in revenue. Tony ran business development for them and did every deal that helped grow that business to over $1 billion a year in revenue. I've got a great board that's got a great mix of business and life science experience, as well as finance. Kevin Schuyler, our chairman of the board, manages a multi-billion-dollar investment fund. So I've got a great team that's helping us to execute on this plan. We think we know exactly what we need to do. It's just a matter of continuing to execute it. And I look forward to giving you an update on our progress in the future. Thanks.